Welcome to the Borough of Madison and welcome to Madison High School, where I was a class of, is this working? So that was supposed to be, see if you caught that, sorry. Anyway, on more serious note, I do want to thank you for coming out on this cold night, though it did feel like springtime compared to what we have had over the last couple weeks. This is a very important topic, and I know there was some confusion. What we have tonight is an informational session. It is not a rally. There was a misunderstanding with a release that went out that there would be a rally here. What we want to do, and our goal for tonight when you leave here, is that you will know more about the pipeline, the possibilities, where it is, what is going on in Trenton related to it, what is happening legally related to it, and so whether it is this issue or anything else that affects us and affects our daily lives, you are a more educated citizen and can make more better informed decisions and also reach out to your legislators as necessary. And this is certainly just one of the many steps in the whole process. And if you haven't already, there were sign-in sheets when you came in, so if you didn't do it coming in, please sign in on your way out so we have your contact information. That would be very helpful. I will be introducing speakers as we go along, but I just want to recognize those that are not speaking that are here, that have given their time in their communities and given their time tonight. I guess I'm going to go over to this side because I'm going to introduce Mayor Harris shortly, but my former camper, but more importantly, Mayor of Florham Park, Mark Taylor. Mark, thank you for joining us tonight. And out in the audience from East Hanover, we have Mayor Joe Panula. Mayor, out there. There he is, thank you. And also, just in, we have Mayor of Montville, Scott Galappo. Scott, welcome, thank you for joining us. From the Borough of Madison, Council President Austria Bailey and Council Member Ben Wolkowitz and Carmela Vitale, welcome. From East Hanover, Mike Mortarelli, out there somewhere. Mike, right next, thank you, Mike. This meeting is being co-hosted by myself as Mayor of Madison. Did I introduce myself? I'm Mayor Conley. And Mayor Bruce Harris of Chatham, so I want to call up Mayor Harris to say a few words.
Well, thank you. I want to say thank you to Mayor Conley, and not only for the nice introduction, but also for taking the lead along with the Borough Administrator for Madison, Ray Cody, and with Governor Cody in pulling together this information session. What is being proposed by Pilgrim Pipeline is of great importance to the community, and back in November when all of the discussion started in Chatham about this project, we became very concerned that people didn't have all of the facts, and so we got very, very focused on making sure that people understood the facts and understood the legal issues before we decide what to do next. So it took a while because of the holidays and all of that for this to happen, but I'm glad that we are here today, and I see a number of Chatham Borough residents out there. I do want to say hello and introduce Councilmember Vicki Feife, who is sitting over there, and she won't stand up because she's shy, but she is here. And I do want to acknowledge someone who's very important to us who can't be here tonight, but Lynn Resto, who is a former council member who heads up the advisory committee that we established that has done a yeoman's job in pulling together information and working with all of the different municipalities that will be impacted by this project. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Harris, and I also want to thank Len Resto. The amount of emails going back and forth the last couple of weeks as Len was working furiously to put this together, it was just the tip of the iceberg, so thank Len for his work. I also want to just help you understand that this is just an example of how the communities work together. As you see mayors from multiple towns in Morris County here, council members, our state legislators. This is how things work. And what makes it truly work is when the residents are informed, and that's what you will have over the next hour or so. I want to bring up our first speaker. Brendan Keating is a member of the Chatham Environmental Commission, was appointed by the Chatham Borough governing body to serve on the special committee dealing with the Pilgrim Pipeline. He is pursuing his master's degree at Cornell University. So with that, Brendan.
Let's go red. All right, first slide, please. So a lot of people don't necessarily know what Bakken crude is. And Bakken crude is a light sweet crude oil that comes from way up there in central Canada, North Dakota, and Montana. And currently it makes its way out east through either southern Canada and then down through Quebec to Albany. Or it goes under the Great Lakes all the way over to Albany as well. And a lot of people don't really realize that we have a crude oil hub in Albany. It's actually pretty neat because it creates jobs up there, which is nice, but there's no mountains to get over there, so it actually gets over there pretty well, and it's a lot less dangerous than trying to build a pipeline through the Appalachians. So about a week ago, George Bochus, who's the Vice President of Development for Pilgrim Pipeline, a guy that I met back in December, he's actually a pretty nice guy. He wrote a letter to the editor of the Madison Eagle, and he asked us to give the project the benefit of the doubt and look at the facts. And if once we got all our information and made our decision, then that would be okay. So hopefully, what we can do is give you the information that you need, and we can come up with the right decision. So what are they proposing? They're proposing a 178-mile pipeline that goes from Albany, New York, down to Linden, New Jersey. And it's a bidirectional pipeline, which means it's not one pipeline, but it's two pipelines. So one pipeline will be bringing crude oil down from Albany, and the other pipeline will be bringing essential stuff like gasoline, diesel, heating oil, and jet fuel back up to Albany, New York. They haven't set a final size for the pipeline yet, but they say that it's going to be anywhere between 18 and 24 inches. And each one is going to be capable of transporting about 200 to 220,000 barrels of oil per day down to New Jersey. And then back up too. So each one is doing 200. They say the project is going to cost somewhere between $900 million and $1 billion, which is a lot of money, but the nice thing about it is it's privately funded. So it's not coming out of our tax pockets, necessarily. They say that the estimated build time is going to be one construction season. So they think that they can get this thing in the ground pretty quickly. And one of their big claims is they believe that they can eliminate 1,000 barge trips per year on the Hudson, which may or may not be true, but it's a lofty goal. So here's our map of where it's going through New Jersey. It's going through 30 towns in 5 counties, and a lot of the folks here are actually from these towns. But you'll notice we've got 33 towns that have done municipal resolutions against the pipeline, and that means that what the best part about it is people have realized outside of just the pipeline area that this affects all of us. So there have been towns that are not even on the pipeline route that have said that they want to oppose the pipeline as well, and that's how they've gotten it. We've had 2 school districts say that they support the opposition to the pipeline, and thank you to Chatham School District and also Watchung. They recognize that this is not just a threat to the children of these districts, but it's also a workplace and occupational safety hazard for the people that work there and the district employees. So we thought it was a very good thing that they were able to do that. Here's an interesting fact. They want to send the pipeline to Linden, and they say that it's going to help create jobs at the Bayway Refinery. Linden, New Jersey just passed a resolution opposing Pilgrim Pipeline. Phillips 66, they're the owner of the Bayway Refinery, the only refinery in Linden, New Jersey. They say that they have no support for the project, and they're not backing it. So a claim that Pilgrim made at a presentation back in June 2014 to some representatives for Union County one of the claims they said that if we build the pipeline, it's going to take what are called unit trains out of service in northern New Jersey. Well, if you read this right here, it says that Phillips 66 right now is investing over a few $100 million on various projects. They're building a rail terminal in North Dakota to load oil onto trains. They're buying and rebuilding and refurbishing thousands of new train cars to get to a capacity of 160,000 barrels per day in their system. And actually, just this August, they opened up a multi-million-dollar rail terminal in Linden. So the claim that Pilgrim Pipeline is going to take the trains off of New Jersey it seems to be questionable if the town and the refinery that they say they're going to has invested all this money. Well, another great thing is, I'm not anti-jobs. It actually kind of makes me angry when people say that Pilgrim Pipeline is not going to bring any benefit to New Jersey. It's just not true. We need jobs in this state. But when you look at it a little bit closer, they say that they're going to create 2,400 jobs. That's a lot of jobs, but they've also said that's only going to take place under one construction season. So those are temporary construction jobs. And they also said that they're going to create 50 permanent jobs, which we do need in this state because those are high-paying jobs. The one thing that's interesting about it, though, is that I came across an article in the Albany Business Review where the manager of the Port of Albany, where the trains and the barges leave out of, say that if the pipeline is built, it actually could be a net job loss for the New York State capital region, because it takes about 7 people to unload a barge, and it takes about 7 people to unload a train, and it takes about 2 people to operate the pipeline. And by that same logic, the trains and the barges are coming down to New Jersey. If they're going to be losing jobs because of less traffic of barges and trains up in New York, you could probably make an assumption that we may lose some jobs in New Jersey too. So while we may be getting these 2,400 temporary construction jobs, and while the pipeline may create 50 permanent jobs, if we're losing good paying jobs in other sectors and other places, the net job growth that they're telling us is probably much lower than what they're saying publicly. So some other great things that Pilgrim says. They say that pipelines are more environmentally friendly, and we'll take a look at that. When you use a pipeline, you're going to create less CO2 emissions. That's legitimate. They say it's safer. Safe is one of those things that once you know what statistics are all about, you can kind of say, a whole bunch of different things. You can say safe is about the amount of deaths or bodily injury that's made. Or safe can be about the amount of oil that's spilled, or the amount of habitats that are ruined, or the amount of water that is contaminated. The EPA, the US EPA says that 1 gallon of used motor oil can contaminate 1 million gallons of fresh water. So a spill from any source would be very bad, but when we look at this, they're trying to tell us that barges are 7 times more likely to spill than pipelines, and that may be true. I don't have that statistic, and unfortunately, they've yet to provide it to us and where it came from. But I won't say that that's not true. But this nice thing over here from the Congressional Research Service, they did a study back in 2012 in February that said when you equalize all of these different forms of transportation for a statistic that's called per billion ton miles and the amount of oil that's spilled, even though if we take their word and say barges are more likely to spill, when you actually get over there, you see that the barges and the rails combined in a period between, 2002 to 2007, spilled less than pipelines. So the other thing that Pilgrim Pipeline says, which is true, that pipelines built after 1990 are much less likely to spill than the pipelines that were built before then. They've made a lot of really good improvements. But the other thing that you have to recognize too is that every other form of transportation also seems to have kept up with that pace and actually exceeded it. So we're getting safer in the transportation of fuels in all different forms. The one thing that still seems to be a problem is the trucking, but when you really think about it, there's not much that we can really do about that because every gas station in the entire state and the entire country is supplied by trucks. So the trucks are, Pilgrim Pipeline is not going to eliminate the amount of trucks that are on the road supplying gas to the gas stations. So next, please. Well, the thing is, we should really look at it a little bit closer. So we saw that map before, and it showed us the amount of towns that had the resolutions. They were the ones in green, and the ones in gray were the ones that we're still working on. But when you look at it a little bit closer, and you take out just the towns, you see that it's not just going through these nice little areas, or as they call them, right-of-ways. They're going over thousands of little streams and tributaries and water sources. Pilgrim Pipeline, in the preliminary map that we were shown last year, has the pipeline crossing the Passaic River 3 times. Yeah, if you get your water bill from New Jersey American Water, you should be concerned because they pull a lot of their water from surface waters, including the Passaic River. So today there are zero hazardous waste pipelines, hazardous liquid pipelines in Morris County, and there's very few in New Jersey altogether. We haven't built them in a long time. There are many gas pipelines out there, and Pilgrim will tell you that is a reason to believe that this pipeline will be safe. And I have a problem with comparing the two because I think it's like apples and oranges. While there may be a risk from a pipeline that transports natural gas to have an explosion or a leak that would, cause havoc, and we've seen it recently too. There was one that happened in Holland Township about a month ago, where it was a construction vehicle backed into a pipeline, and they had to evacuate people from the town from about a half a mile around, and in order to do that, they had to send in their police department and their first responders while this thing was spewing gas into the air, and it put a lot of people at risk. But the thing is, with a pipeline, as Pilgrim Pipeline says on their myths versus facts sheet, there's no reported cases of oil pipelines exploding in this country. So it's a different animal altogether. But what they do is that they have the ability to spill. And when they do spill, if you remember that stat that we had before, even though that their occurrence of a spill is less in a pipeline, the amount of oil that is spilled per incident is much higher, leading to some pretty catastrophic consequences. So let's see what's next. So just to kind of put this in perspective, this is Southern Boulevard School. We zoom in even further from just seeing the streams and everything. We're seeing that it's actually going next to where we send our kids to be safe during the day, and we have people that work there, the teachers, the custodians. They could be at risk because when a spill happens, it takes years to clean up. I mean, for example, and not only that, but they say that these spills can be caught by what they're called, smart pigs or pressure sensors. But that's not always the case. There was a farmer in North Dakota that walked out of his house one day and discovered that there was 840,000 gallons spilled onto his property. He says that for the last, this was a couple years ago, for 2 years, he's had a crew cleaning up 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and they're still not done. Kalamazoo, Michigan. There was a pipeline break, also 840,000 gallons, ironically, back in 2010. Still not clean. We've got a lot of people here, so I won't ask for a guess on what the cleanup bill costs, but they're still not done cleaning it up, and the total, as of now, actually as of November, was $1.2 billion with a B dollars. And you know what? People where their pipelines are all over the country, they're in less populated areas than we are. But there have been pipeline spills that occurred in suburban communities. When you get home, Google Mayflower, Arkansas, which is actually kind of an ironic name. We're getting Pilgrim Pipeline here, and the Mayflower is where the Pilgrims came on. But in Mayflower, Arkansas, back in 2013, there was a 210,000 gallon spill in a neighborhood. And similar to that picture right there, where there's a swing set in the backyard where the pipeline break actually happened, there was a swing set there too that looked pretty similar. To this day, it's not done being cleaned up, and not all the families have returned to their homes. And there's been reports that, you know, the kids in town are getting headaches and things like that. You know, I can't back that up, and of course the oil company that sent in the doctor says that they're not related, but, you know, you should be aware. We're giving facts here tonight. And then just to top off one other thing, many of you heard that there was recently a spill in the Yellowstone River. One of our nation's treasures. It's 50,000 gallons, and you know, they have a climate that's not too dissimilar to ours. They've had a real trouble cleaning it up. This was also Bakken fuel, because the river froze and the cleanup crews haven't really been able to get there. So, and in that process, they've contaminated the drinking water for an entire town. So next. So we say, well, how does it affect Madison? I remember when I first met somebody who was from this town at a informational meeting in Watchung back in December. They said, you know, we're concerned because this affects all of us, but it doesn't go through Madison. Well, that's my house right there. I live in Chatham, and that's Brook Lake Road, and that's Division Road. Every one of those houses right there is from Madison, and I'm a couple hundred yards away, but you could literally throw a paper airplane out your window from a house in Madison and get there. So there are Madison residents that would be affected by this. And on top of that, this is the Buried Valley Aquifer. This is the sole source aquifer for where Chatham gets its water. It's also where Madison gets its water. And you can find Madison by that big blue blob right in the middle right there. So we're standing literally right over the drinking water for this entire area. You know, you might get a hydrologist that says crude oil might not get down to the aquifer level, but we also have to remember this is a bidirectional pipeline. And they're sending jet fuel and gasoline and diesel. And we're not so sure about whether or not that'll get down there. So, you know, we need more information about that, but I figured we'd at least have it out there. So this brings us to why I'm here, is I want to thank all of these great legislators and the town mayors and the town councils and the school boards and everybody for really hearing us. You guys are the reason that we're here today. When we look at this, AR 191 was the assembly resolution that went through. It was a bipartisan resolution. We had some of the most powerful Democrats, the most powerful Republicans in the state get together and sponsor this resolution. But a resolution is different from a bill. A resolution is non-binding. It's not a law. But you know what, though? 54-5, that sends a message. That sends a message to us saying that they heard us. We did a good job. We made the phone calls. We wrote the letters, we knocked on the doors, and we made the meetings. And it's because of when our friend over here, Governor Cody, introduces it to committee next week, it passes through really quick, and we can get hopefully a 0 in the against column next time. So here's another thing, though, too. We want to talk about the merit of the project. And I don't disagree that Pilgrim Pipeline may be able to accomplish some good things. But I think we should also keep in mind, too, that it may not absolutely be necessary. Pilgrim Pipeline officials in their own speeches have said, you know, the end of the fossil fuel era is not going to be coming for another 20 to 30 years, maybe even more. And that's fine. They say, well, in that time, shouldn't we have the safest, most economical way to be getting these fuels, you know, transported around? Which is an interesting argument. But the thing is, the fuel that they're getting is the Bakken fuel, and the Bakken fuel is a limited resource, and it's not going to be there forever. We have an infrastructure in place, and it's completely scalable. So if we start drilling more oil, we can put more barges in the river. If we want to put more trains on the tracks, we shouldn't ban the trains, at least not in my opinion. I think we should make the safest trains possible. We think we should be investing in the safest train tracks possible. It's all part of a complete decision. But the thing is, when we're talking about a temporary energy source, you know, we should be thinking, what do we absolutely need to do? If what we have is good and we can continue to make it safer, why would we want to put something permanent in the ground? Especially when the oil does run out, are we really going to be able to dig the thing back up again? Or is it going to be sitting there forever, eventually maybe leaking some sort of stuff back into the ground that we were trying to prevent from getting in there in the first place. You know, building this pipeline is not going to eliminate all the risks of spills from the other ones, because we haven't yet been able to prove whether it's going to take one barge off the river, whether it's going to take one train off the tracks. And if it does, we haven't been able to prove that pipelines are foolproof themselves. And on top of that, building a pipeline in this area, or if they choose to move the projected route over time, is only going to invite a risk into a new area that didn't have one before. So if you do want to get more information, and we want to be kind of bipartisan on this one, here's your spots where you can get your Pilgrim Pipeline information. That's their Twitter handle. And here's some information that you can get from, you know, the other side. But just so I can indulge myself, and because I have the mic and I feel like I should, I'm a member of the millennial generation. You know, I'm the member of the generation that's going to be dealing with these consequences for a long time. I'm also a very hopeful person. I love this country, and I think we've done some amazing things. Remember, we're the ones that went to the moon. You know, I still say we need to reach for the stars. The thing that we really need to do is encourage our politicians and encourage you to stay on the task. Don't give up, because this is not over. Because what we really need to be doing is figuring out what we need to do to get ourselves to that next level. We need to be building a bridge to our future and not a pipeline to our past. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brendan. It was very helpful. Our next speaker, Diane Alexander, is a Madison resident, just a few blocks from here, and a partner law firm of Marizzi Falcon LLP. She has over 30 years of experience practicing law with the concentration in environmental compliance, permitting, water quality, and wastewater management, along with being an environmental attorney for the joint meeting of Madison Chatham. So welcome, Diane, and thank you for coming.
Thank you, Mayor Connolly. As Mayor Connolly said, I'm an environmental attorney. I've been practicing law for over 25 years. I have been representing sewage authorities and municipalities and planning boards and various infrastructure, water, wastewater, and otherwise. And I've been asked here tonight to talk about the regulatory process and the regulatory approvals and the opportunities that the public has to get involved in the process to make sure that their voice and their concerns are heard. There are various avenues, direct and indirect, that allow concerned citizens to voice their opinions. The direct route, as I call it, is actual opportunities for public hearings and the submission of comments. I'm going to go through the laws, hopefully quickly, and let you know where they are. The other indirect route would be to make sure that when a regulatory approval is issued or when a aspect of the pipeline is considered, that your voice is heard in the regulatory process, in that the standards that are set forth in the regulations are complied with, all the I's are dotted, all the T's are crossed. Not everyone at the table is going to have the impetus to make sure that we get what those regulations allow. So I'm here to say there is an opportunity for the public to participate, even indirectly, in these regulatory processes. I'm first going to start with the environmental laws that may impact the project on a federal level. I don't exactly know what the route that will ultimately be selected. So some of the things that I talk about tonight may or may not impact the project. But then I'm going to go into the state laws that impact the project, some of which overlap with the federal. And lastly, I'm going to address a few legal issues that also may impact the project. On the federal landscape, the place to start is the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. It's For this project, led by US EPA and the US Army Corps of Engineers, it requires an environmental assessment. That's a document that's drafted at first by the applicant. It goes through why the project is needed, what the project is, what adverse impacts are going to be anticipated by the project. The reviewing agency, either EPA or the Army Corps, is going to look at that document, and if that document is satisfactory to them and that there are no significant impacts, they're going to issue the final environmental assessment and a finding of no significant impact. NEPA applies in all instances where a federal permit is issued, and its applicability depends upon whether or not, in this instance, wetlands or federal waters are going to be impacted. If the EPA or Army Corps finds that there are going to be serious impacts, they require what's called an environmental impact statement, and that looks at the environmental consequences and alternatives, including the no action alternative. Before that's issued and final, individuals can request a hearing. And all along this process, individuals can request notice that they be notified in the event of a public hearing or the availability of documents. Due to the nature and length of the pipeline, an issue also arises regarding whether the Army Corps of Engineers will require that the environmental assessment look at a part of the pipeline with respect to only those areas that are under federal jurisdiction, or whether or not the environmental assessment looks at the whole entire pipeline. It may be crucial for our voices to be heard with respect to whether it makes sense to look at part of the pipeline or the pipeline as a whole, for the reasons that we talked about earlier. But until the pipeline's known, we don't know if NEPA is going to be triggered. But looking at the route, it seems very difficult to traverse the state without hitting a federal water course. The second federal law I want to talk about briefly is the Federal Wetlands and Endangered Species Acts. The federal wetlands are regulated through a permit. The permits regulate temporary construction-related type activities and also regulate permit impacts. They also provide for enforcement in the event of a violation. These permits are issued after notice and an opportunity for a public hearing. You're not going to get a public hearing if you don't ask for one. So this would be another instance where the public would have to come out and say, this is important, we need a public hearing. The Federal Endangered Species Act governs threatened and endangered plants and animals. There are endangered plants and animals along the route. Probably this will be overseen by New Jersey Fish and Wildlife as opposed to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. But again, that's another opportunity to make sure that if there are endangered species, that they're protected. Lastly, on the federal level, oversight over the pipeline may come through the Department of Transportation, through the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. They get involved in the pipeline once it receives its land approvals and make sure that its design, construction, operation, and maintenance is up to standard. There's no right of public access. There's no right of public hearing in this process, but it behooves us to make sure that if a standard has been established, that that standard is met by the design and construction of the pipeline. With respect to state requirements, there are many, and that's the good news. To start, it appears obvious that several streams are going to be crossed in this pipeline, Snake River 3 times, for example. In this area, in New Jersey, streams are classified into categories that equate to their level of protection. All freshwater streams are either freshwater 1 or freshwater 2 streams. A freshwater 1 stream is wholly within a federal or state land or special holding. A stream can be designated freshwater 1 if it has special unique characteristics. Freshwater 2 is all other waters. They also are further classified into trout production, trout maintenance, and non-trout. Obviously, trout production receives the highest level of protection. The ability to disturb these streams is regulated by what's called the Anti-Degradation Policy, and that says that there can be no measurable change to waters that are trout production or Category 1 waters. There are also Category 1 waters which allow some measurable change, but not very much. The stream encroachment permit is going to look at the amount of adverse impact that can be anticipated from the project through the construction phase and through the actual operations stage. And if it's a Category 1 water, which many waters, especially in the northern half of the state, are, they will be afforded extra protection and a buffer area around the stream. Permits are issued to protect and preserve water quality. With respect to wetlands, there will be wetlands. Wetlands aren't just wetlands. Wetlands are also forested areas that are within the definition of wetlands. An applicant must apply for a permit and submit an application with an alternatives analysis. In order to get a permit, the applicant has to mitigate any damages and demonstrate that along the way any impact will be minimized. This is another opportunity where the public can get involved. The permit requires notice to the neighboring landowners as well as notice in the paper. The application is kept on file with the municipal clerk. So in the event that in the very likely event that freshwater wetlands permits are applied for, we should be vigilant and make sure that they require the utmost protection for our scarce resources. There's also a state Endangered Species Act that will also likely be triggered along this route. The job of the DEP in this regard is to minimize or mitigate adverse impacts. There's also likely to be a flood hazard area review and permit for any aspect of this project that traverses a flood hazard area. That would require public notice. Dave's going to talk a little bit about the Highlands Preservation area. The Highlands Council will have to determine that the project is consistent with the regional master plan, and DEP will have to ensure that the pipeline meets the minimum requirements of the Highlands Act. There's also a natural and historic resource preservation review that's undertaken. This is a department in the DEP that protects historic properties and archaeological sites. They use conservation easements to protect areas, and they may require, if this pipeline is going through such an area, a lease. In order to get that lease, the applicant is going to have to replace the land lost or disturbed, both during construction and once the pipeline is in place, and they will have to mitigate any impacts. They can do that through in-kind replacement, monetary compensation, or otherwise. The Historic Preservation Office also performs a similar review. Another review that I think is going to be critical is the Green Acres review. Quite a bit of space in New Jersey has been preserved forever for open space, and our tax dollars went to purchasing that space. So it behooves us to make sure that when this pipeline does come through, that we receive compensation for any land taken out of the Green Acres program by this disturbance. The Green Acres program reviews two types of disturbances, which are called diversions. There's a minor and a major diversion. The minor diversion requires a public hearing. There's public notice and comment, and then the application goes to the State House Commission for their approval. The State House Commission is made up of the governor or his designee, the state treasurer or his designee, the director of the budget, 2 members of the Senate, and 2 members of the General Assembly. Green Acres will give a deed to the applicant, so it's important that we get what we deserve in return for that effort. Another requirement which may or may not come into play, Brendan talked about the sole source aquifer that we sit upon. There is a Sole Source Aquifer Protection Act. That is only triggered if federal funds are involved. There may or may not be federal funds in this project. They say that they're privately funded, but an argument may be able to be made that the use of a public right-of-way or the use of a public highway is also tantamount to using public funds. The Sole Source Aquifer Protection Act will be a specific look at this project from the perspective of the sole source aquifer, and it's very important that that's protected. There will also be trees cut down and reforestation. The state has a policy of no net loss with respect to forestation. The applicant can either replace the trees on site at an alternative site or via monetary compensation. Those are the highlights of the environmental regulations that affect this property, this project. But there are other issues. The issue that is most talked about is the use of the highway and the right to use the highway right-of-way. The DOT regulations establish that utilities are to be accommodated in the public right-of-way because they don't want utilities all over the state. However, that access is not unfettered. A utility agreement or permit has to be issued by the Department of Transportation in order to allow that use. And there are regulations that establish the location, design, alignments, and standards for each individual type of use that is allowed in the right-of-way. Another right-of-way that has been claimed to be under consideration is the PSE&G right-of-way. I am less familiar with the PSE&G approvals, but we would have to ensure that the approvals coincide with the activities that are intended to be conducted. I don't know what PSE&G's approval is, but if it is to put in an electrical tower, that may not be consistent with the location of a pipeline underground. One would think that PSE&G would be concerned about the liability that they would incur by allowing this additional use of their property, both during construction and upon completion. In New Jersey, the law is owners and operators are strictly liable jointly and severally. So if there's a spill, whether it's caused by PSE&G or it's caused by Pilgrim Pipeline or whoever owns it. At that point, PSE&G could still be on the hook for that spill. And also, it seems inconsistent with future plans that PSE&G may have if it wishes to expand its lines or change their position. But I guess it would be up to PSE&G, and there would not be much opportunity for public participation in that process. The other issue that was talked about considerably is condemnation and a utility's right to condemn property. There is an issue whether an oil pipeline has the right to condemn or to take private property. If Pilgrim Pipeline wants to condemn property, it must demonstrate that it is necessary for public use. That is the rub. We don't, at this point, know if that would pass legal muster relative to public use. There's also a further question about whether or not that type of taking is constitutional, as there are no standards for that type of regulatory taking. If there is a condemnation, and the condemnation is found to be appropriate, there can be a route challenge. So there would be an opportunity to establish that that route is not the best possible route. Another legal issue that has come up is the municipal authority to zone against pipelines. The crux of this issue is whether or not a municipality can prohibit by ordinance a pipeline within the town. The municipality has the legal authority to rezone an area, but can it rezone the area to restrict this use? There are two issues with that. One is whether or not it's already preempted by the number of laws and regulations that I talked to you about earlier. The other would be whether or not there could be an underlying rationale, separate and apart from these, that would justify the zone change. This would be a very interesting challenge. In conclusion, there are opportunities under all of these programs to directly or indirectly get involved in the process. Any interested party can request to be kept informed and can attend public hearings. The public has the right to submit comments during relevant comment periods and has the right to review documents. I highly encourage you to ensure that your voice is heard in this process. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diane. I have my right notes here. Our next speaker, David Pifer. David is currently the Highlands Project Director for Association of New Jersey Environmental Commissions, known as ANJAC. He previously served many years Executive Director of the Upper Raritan Watershed Association, and with a common theme you'll see up here is a graduate that has a Madison connection because he's a graduate of Drew University. So welcome home, Dave, and thank you for coming to share your information.
Hi, guys. Glad to see you're all out here tonight in the cold weather and saving on your heating bills at home and conserving energy. I'm here to talk to you tonight about primarily one thing, which is a possible threat to water resources. And I want to start off by saying that assessing threat risk is not an easy task. If you have a technology that you're trying to assess, you have to understand the technology. But you also have to understand in considerable detail where that technology is proposed to be applied. And we don't have detailed information about this project yet. If it made you tired thinking about fighting your way through the regulatory process, good, because it's tiring. So let me say this to you all about this. you need to have a good organization that's supportive of one another. You need to have the ability to change horses when people get tired, and you need to have the ability to keep common understanding and respect among the groups. This is not going to be done by any one person, and it's probably not going to be done by regulatory agencies. So I want to talk today about some of the things that we may encounter as we go along. Brendan did a pretty good job of outlining what the project is as we know it today. There are two pipes involved here. One is a crude oil line that would bring crude oil down from Albany, which arrives in Albany by rail and barge. And the other one is a rather interesting pipeline that carries refined products northward. Now, what do we mean by refined products? There are about 60 different products that are transferred through pipelines that we would call petroleum refined products. These range from aviation fuel to specific chemical feedstocks that are used in various industrial processes. And to my way of thinking, the greater risk here to the environment comes from that second line, that up line, or that line that carries the refined product. Crude oil is bad when it gets loose in the environment. But something like gasoline or jet fuel or kerosene or number 2 heating oil is far worse. I was involved in 1980 and into 81 with a spill on the Getty oil pipeline in Tewksbury Township. That was a relatively small spill, about 45,000 gallons of a mixture of number 2 heating oil and water, which wiped out 5.5 miles of trout stream, destroyed every bit of life in the stream. 4 years later, you could still stir the bottom sediments with your foot and see an oily sheen rise from the bottom of that stream. It was upstream of the Elizabethtown Water Company intake at Bound Brook. The end result of that was that Getty Oil was found negligent. They were fined $4.5 million, ordered to put in check valves at each side of the stream, at every stream crossing, and ordered to replace substandard sections of the pipe. Rather than comply with the federal requirements, they chose to abandon the line. Then the record was sealed by the court. So if you go looking for this, you're never going to find it. But I can tell you that we had fun. Coming back to this business of where you apply the technology and the argument that pipelines are the safest form of transportation for petroleum products, let me start with January of 2015. On January 14th, the Evangeline Pipeline in Cameron Parish, Louisiana, broke with equipment was trapped inside the line making an inspection. That line had been ordered to comply with federal rules in October and had not done so. January 14th, there was a natural gas explosion at the Ross Barnett Reservoir in Brandon, Mississippi, left a crater greater than 1 acre of forest burned. January 19th, oil, Yellowstone River, Brendan mentioned this one, contaminated the water supply for Glendive, Montana. Bridger Pipelines was the name of the company. Their line was called the Poplar Line. It was a 12-inch diameter pipe, half the size of the Pilgrim pipe, possibly. It was carrying Bakken crude, and it took over 1 hour to shut the pipeline down. January 21, crude oil pump station fire in Texas City, Texas. January 26th, ethane, one of those refined products moving through a pipeline, resulted in an explosion and fire in Brooke County, West Virginia. 5 acres of woodlands burnt and 24,000 gallons of ethane was consumed. That was attributed to a weld failure. That pipeline was less than 2 years old. So pipeline accidents do occur, and the impacts to a community can be devastating. Those are words right out of the Federal Regulatory Manual. Between 2000 and 2014, there have been 305 reported incidents involving pipelines of all kinds, not just oil, but natural gas and refined products, averaging 21 incidents a year. And the U.S. Department of Transportation calls these events low probability, high consequence events. So let's take a look at threats to our water here in New Jersey, recognizing that we have some pretty vague mapping. We don't have information on pump station locations, storage areas, access roads, or valve installations that would accompany any mature pipeline plan. Starting at the north and working our way south, the threat to New Jersey's water actually begins in Woodbury, New York, some miles north of the state line. The reason for that is the pipeline is proposed to closely parallel the Ramapo River, which enters New Jersey and is used as water supply to augment the water in the Wanacue Reservoir and the Oradell Reservoir, and which flows then into the Pompton River and on down to the Passaic, where there's another large pump station that transfers water back to Wanacue Reservoir. If we had crude oil or refined product in that river at exactly the wrong time when those reservoirs needed augmentation, we would have a serious problem. So we need to figure out a way to reach out to some folks in New York State about this same issue, because that water flows downhill into New Jersey. There is a groundwater sole source aquifer designation on the Ramapo, which includes the township of Mahwah, the borough of Ramsey, the borough of Oakland, the borough of Franklin Lakes, the borough of Allendale, the borough of Pompton Lakes, and the borough of Wayne. At the time that was designated as a sole source aquifer, the total population served by groundwater wells from that area was 64,800 people. Well, you're saying, well, the water would get into the river. How does it bother the groundwater? Well, the fact is that in the Ramapo, the river and the groundwater are closely connected, so that when the wells pump from the groundwater, they draw water from the river through the soils into the wells. When the river floods, it recharges the wells. And this is all well known and well documented. So we have an extra special scariness up there. Let's talk a little bit about major river crossings. How does a pipeline get across a river? Well, there was a time when they would do things like lay them on the bottom of the river. We actually have a reservoir in New Jersey that has a natural gas line laid on the bottom of it. Nowadays, they use tunneling machines and tunnel under the river. Major river crossings, we have one of the Rockaway River, one of the Whippany River, 3 of the Passaic River, and 4 of the poor old little Rahway River. Does anybody know if anybody drinks the water out of the Rahway River? All right. It's already got some fun with things like salt in it now and then. But the fact is that the Rahway is as threatened as anybody else, maybe more so by this particular route. Looking at the mapping we have available, it's fairly easy to figure out that most of what they're proposing to use is somebody else's right-of-way. And I can't tell you the business complexities of that, but I can tell you that it's a way to try to put people at ease about their impact on the environment. Well, they're already disturbed areas, so we're not hurting much. You might be surprised, say, a single pole line right-of-way in the Ramapo Mountains. There's some pretty sensitive stuff out there. So what's going through this upline, this line going north, could be gasoline, diesel fuel, kerosene, aviation gas, jet fuel, natural gas liquids, heating fuels like home heating oil, liquid propane, liquefied natural gas, and chemical feedstocks like carbon dioxide, ethane, crude oil, and an interesting one, anhydrous ammonia. I'll do my best. How's that? How's that? I'm sorry. If I go soft again, just go like this. Okay. So what can we say about the risk of these things in the water resource situation that we're looking at? I think it's really interesting to find language in federal documents that says something like this. Hazardous liquid spills can spread over land and water, flowing into valleys, ravines, and waterways. They present the potential for ecological damage and contamination of drinking water supplies to occur some distance from the point of initial release. Weather conditions and water temperatures greatly influence the behavior of oil and refined petroleum products in the environment. So when you're evaluating hazard, there's a lot to do. 4 basic things have to be done. What commodity are you talking about getting loose in the environment? How much might be released? Remember I told you it took over an hour to shut down that pipeline out west in Yellowstone? Well, imagine something 24 inches in diameter full of something leaking, and say it's 10 miles from the nearest check valve. So how much is that? That's a lot of stuff. Where might it go? And we all know that New Jersey's northern water supply system is complex and integrated and interconnected. So it's not easy to say, well, it got in the Ramapo River. Suppose it got picked up by the pump station at Pompton Lake and put into the Wanacue Reservoir. Now it's in the reservoir. So you need to know where it might go, and then you need to know what locations might be impacted. Why do pipelines fail? It's interesting because when you look at the statistics on pipeline failures, corrosion is the #1 cause, followed by excavation damage. How many of you remember the major gas explosion down near Madison? That was just a guy in a backhoe digging out there. So excavation damage is the #2 cause of pipeline failure. Incorrect operation. Now, I don't really understand what that means. Did you put too much pressure in it? Did you, I don't know, put a grilled cheese sandwich in the pipe? I have no idea what it was you did. But that's the number 3 cause of pipeline failures. Number 4, material failures, weld failures, or equipment failures. The next one is a really interesting one, natural force damage. We just had Hurricane Sandy. We've also had other things happen in other parts of the country. The Yellowstone River break that Brendan mentioned and I mentioned a little while ago, that pipeline company thought that pipe was securely buried in the bottom of the river, but the river had eroded the bed of the river away, and now the pipeline was hanging out there in the river. So natural force damage, it's a really interesting problem. You can't control for it. You can't just say, well, the wind should not blow, or the flood should not come, or the landslide or earthquake shouldn't happen. And then finally, there's this other magic one that they put all the rest of stuff into this category, other outside force damage. Does that give you any idea what that might be? Other outside force damage. No, that would be natural, right? Thank you. Interesting issue. So, all reported incidents of pipeline failures between 2008 and 2013 resulted in $1.8 billion in property damage, 21 injuries, 12 deaths, net amount of oil lost, 394,000 gallons, gross oil lost, 510,000 gallons. Where do you think the other 200,000 are? Yeah, it went out, we got some back, but the rest of it, we don't know where it is. It's out there somewhere. So it seems to me that there's a lot of thinking that's been done about making pipelines safe after you've accepted them by the federal government. They're actually different agency that regulates pipeline safety from the ones that regulate the siting of the pipelines. And it also seems to me that we need to take some of these considerations about risk and put them into the siting process and not let them wait for the pipe to be installed. One of the things that the folks that regulate the pipelines at the DOT consider to be highest risk segments of a pipeline are high population areas, urbanized areas with 50,000 or more people and a population density of 1,000 people per square mile. What's the population density of New Jersey? Yeah, it's like 1,100 people per square mile. So all of New Jersey is potentially in the highest risk segment category. Unusually sensitive areas of the environment, drinking water sources. We know that the Ramapo, the Pompton, the Passaic, the Whippany, the Rahway, all are major drinking water sources that this line will cross. Unusually sensitive ecological areas. Well, the Great Swamp is right next to one of these proposed routes. And then navigable waterways, commercially navigable waterways. I don't think we're going to find any of those up in this part of the world. So I think in the end, there are some interesting approaches. One way to deal with this whole thing is to organize and fight through all the regulatory requirements, one after another, after another, after another. The other is to think outside the box a little bit, perhaps, and think about some political action or some legislative action. And this is not going to be easy, and it's not going to be quick. It's nice that the price of oil is really low right now. I don't know how much longer that'll last. But I'm glad to see you all here, and I think you have the basis for a pretty strong fight. So I hope that we don't all just go home and watch Downton Abbey, whatever. So thank you all.
Thank you, Dave. Now we'll shift over to our legislative team, and our first speaker needs no introduction, but I get paid by the word, so I'm going to introduce you anyway. Well, I at least have to say that to continue with the theme, Madison Connection, FDU, Madison, Florham Park. So, Governor Cody.
Absolutely. Anybody want to get up and stretch? That's fine with me. In any event, good evening, and thank you all for coming out tonight. And by the way, Brendan, you mentioned you were part of the Millennium generation. I'm part of the Baby Boomer generation. But right now we're talking the same language, pal, okay? Good enough. And by the way, you mentioned about endangered species. I'm one of them. I'm a Democrat right now in Morris County. That's endangered species, believe me. Believe me. I want a couple of things. Which one? This one? You sure? Sure, Bob? Okay, Bob. Thank you. You're a YCM guy. I know that. There's a couple of things we should run by you. There's two bills going through the legislature. One's a resolution, which my mates did a great job in the Assembly getting passed. However, resolution is just the sense of the Assembly, the sense of the Senate. It has no legal way to effectuate anything other than that. Now, there is another bill that says that any company with oil does not have the right of eminent domain. Right now they do. About a century ago, just before I entered the legislature, Standard Oil got the right to come through with the oil, and they were given the power of eminent domain. So the second bill would say it no longer exists, and they would have to go before the BPU to get that power. I don't see that happening, to be honest with you, and we're all hopeful that both the Senate resolution and both these bills will pass, both houses, shortly. And the really good thing about this is, for example, I'm very close to John Bramnick, who is the minority leader, Republican minority leader in the Assembly, and Tom Kean, who is the Republican minority leader in the Senate. Both are co-sponsors of these bills. So as I said, it's not a partisan issue in any way, shape, or form, and that helps us tremendously. The one thing I must tell you is that I met with, lobbyists called me, who I've known for quite a long time, said, Dick, would you meet with the Pilgrim people? I said, hey, listen, I'll meet with anybody, but if they think they're going to come in here and, talk me out of it, that's a long shot. So we met for about an hour and a half or so, went back and forth on the issues. So we're getting close to the end, and I said, the old expression by lawyers, as you know, Dave, is that you never ask a question you don't know the answer to, but I did it anyway. And I said, is there any other route? They said, well, yeah, there is. I said, why not? I said, okay, I get it. Money. Well, yeah, it would be a little more expensive. I said, well, maybe that could have a possibility. Maybe. But that route is something that would not affect anybody here right now, as far as I know. in terms of going through backyards, so forth and so on. So I'm hopeful on that end that it works out. And by the way, the fact that PSE&G has not said anything about letting them, meaning the Pilgrim Company, go through their grid lines, so forth and so on, I think is good. Hopefully they turn them down and we don't have to meet again. I don't mind meeting with you, by the way, not at all. And by the way, Dave, you talked about saving energy at home while we're here. You've never met my wife, pal. Believe me, I think that George Bush got the idea for 1,000 points of light by driving by the house. Believe me, no question about it. But, you know, this, as Dave and Diane and Brendan pointed out, to have a spill that could affect the drinking water of over 1 million New Jerseyans is unbelievable. And that potential exists. And he was trying to tell me that, oh no, we're safer than any other way. And I think, Brendan, you did a good job of trying to dispel that myth, okay? But the one thing I will tell you is this. 3 hours before they were to meet with me, there was two gentlemen, when I came out of my office, my Senate office, walking around. They said, oh, Governor, how are you? I said, I introduced myself. I said, can I help you? He said, no, we're here for the 2 o'clock meeting. And I said, well, it's 11 o'clock. And he said, we're part of the PR firm that just got hired. So, I mean, they're ready to buckle down and get this done. But all of us coming together, talking to our neighbors and everybody else. And by the way, the fact that Mayor Taylor is here, Mayor Harris, Mayor Connolly, Mayor Panula, I forgot the name of the gentleman who just got elected, who? I don't forget that, don't worry about it. From Montville, new mayor, right? Okay. Calapo, come si va, right? Am I right? You didn't think an Irishman could speak Italian, right? I can. But listen, those of us who represent you are all dedicated to helping you, and you can help us. As I said, the more you talk about it to your neighbors, your friends, and so forth and so on. And by the way, Bob and Mayor House, Len Resto, his office, is about 20 yards away from my business office. He comes in every day lobbying me, so he's doing a great job for all of you. Thank you all for coming out, and let's hope that we get a victory here, okay? Thank you all for coming. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Assemblywoman Mila J.C. Assemblywoman. Yeah, that's why I did it in this order. He was running, sorry. So Mila is another representative from the 27th District, chair of the Higher Education Committee, and member and past president of South Orange Maplewood Board of Education, graduate of Barnard College with an MS and all that. And take the microphone.
And also, in my former life, I was a public health nurse, so anything that affects our well-being impacts me and you and all of us and greatly interests us. I just want to say tonight, I know it's been kind of a long evening, so I first want to compliment everybody who came out and who stayed to learn more about this issue. This is about my 4th or 5th meeting on the issue, and every time I come, I learn something new. We talked about, Brendan mentioned his generation. The reason that we found out about this, the way in which we found out about this, was from a young woman named Jessica, whom I've known since she was a little girl, who is part of your generation, Brendan. And it just goes to show that one person can make a difference. She called the office, she got this started with us, and I want you to know that all three of us are certainly with you for the long run. This is not going to be a quick fix or an easily done, easily arrived at solution. So we're here with you all the way. We'll do everything that we can possibly do on the state level. We need partnership with you, with your mayors who are here tonight, with your council members, but it's important for you to talk it up wherever you are, in the grocery store, at church, at synagogue, at the cleaners, wherever you are. Let people know about this. because you do have the power to not only question it, but stop it, if in fact we decide collectively that it's a bad idea. And right now, I can't think of any reason why it would be a good idea. So I want to thank you for coming out tonight. I want to thank the mayor for inviting us, and let's together see this through and do what's best for our communities. I appreciate it. Good night.
With respect to equal treatment, I'll just say Assemblyman John McKeon.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I appreciate it very, very much. I got to lower the mic. Real funny. That's good. It's our governor, the comedian. Hey, thank you for staying tonight. And I bet you I've spoken to many of you personally because if you're out tonight, you're probably one of literally hundreds that have been calling our offices. There's nothing but better than grassroots activism, and please keep it up. Dick was quipping about we're endangered species as Democrats in Morris County, but we never ever look at it that way. I don't see Mayor Platt here tonight, but we've worked collaboratively, and we're thrilled about the money that's going to come from Green Acres to preserve land and the Deer Park track. Mayor Connolly, of course, we've got some great victories very recently. For Madison, we're going to get a green acre exemption to allow you to put solar up on the utility. You're going to be able to go to the secondary market in aggregating electricity. It's going to put $400 on the average in the pockets of Madison taxpayers. Not too bad. And of course, with our friends Mayor Taylor and Mayor Harris and Mayor Panula, who I can't believe is staying in one spot for so long tonight. I don't. Well, we all work collaboratively. That's it. You're right, Mayor. You would. I know the words that you would be using. You wouldn't be as kind as the rest of us. All right, Mayor. That's enough. But in effect, the environment isn't a red or a blue issue. It's one that's green. And I've been proud to be in the legislature for a number of years, and frankly, clean water has been something that I've focused on. The time that I go up on the soccer games up to the Highlands, they're like, hey, that's the guy, that's the Highlands Preservation guy. They don't maybe love it there, but for us, for our state, it's the best thing. And it's not always about, what's green and tree hugging and environmental issues, although that's all important. It's for our economic well-being. Think about the 9 million people that live here and our sources of water. New Jersey has so many vicissitudes, but one thing we have is a cheap source of water. And when only 1% of all the water in the world is drinkable, that's going to be the reason for our economic vitality in the future. And that's why, with all of your support, we now have permanent funding for open spaces, and we can't blow it. And this will put us in a position to do that. Will it happen? Will we let it happen? No. We won't. So God bless you all. Let's work hard together, and let's get them.
So I want to thank you all for coming out tonight, for Mayor Harris for co-hosting this with me, and all the mayors and elected officials in this room. There are times such as this when there's talk of a pipeline or wherever it might be, and is it NIMBY or is it in everyone's backyard? I think we have the facts to make that decision now, and we have to protect our backyard. So thank you again, and you know what you need to do. Some of the speakers may have some time hanging around if you have some direct questions, but again, thank you so much, and stay active no matter what it is.
Well, it does, because it's going to go through there. Great seeing you. Thank you.
Been there, done that.
It's tricky. Careful.
What are they doing? I'm sitting here all night trying to figure it out.
I was trying to figure out
Is it?
See ya. Nice job.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you. Be in touch.
I believe you must be from north of the border.
I can pull the accent a bit.
Yeah, that's good.
But